So, of course, the talk is called Why Discuss Gender as the World Burns. And when I wrote a description of the talk, I said I would talk briefly about the analytical reasons why gender is connected to climate change and militarism, but then plunge into a deeper response to the question. I said I would discuss what gender has to do with love, and what love has to do with social change, and why addressing the problem of gender is necessary personally and culturally if we're to face the biggest challenges of our time. But actually, after Boris after he sent the description out and I reread it, I thought it sounded so pretentious. Because it sounds like I think I can teach all of you about what love is and how to be mobilized by it, which isn't my intention. So mainly I want to share what I've learned from two extraordinary historic figures about kind of what it takes to meet the challenges of our time. One of them is Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and the other one is Dutch-Jewish diarist Etty Hillesum, who lived under Nazi occupation in the 1940s Amsterdam, who I also feel somewhat connected with because she's originally from the same town that my parents are from, and one of the women who she was in constant contact with while she ended up in Westerbork, a labor camp in eastern Holland, and one of the people she was in constant correspondence with was my auntie's school teacher. So I have that kind of intimacy with Etty as well. So she was murdered at Auschwitz at the age of 29, and her diaries are incredibly powerful. So these two people are guiding stars for me, and I want to share something about why. So of course, gender, the theme of this talk, is another word for sex roles, the notion of male dominance and female subordination that sustains institutions and industries from prostitution to porn and the beauty industry, also marriage and surrogacy, industries, of course, that grant men status as possessors of female sex objects, a notion that's also culturally embedded and affects us in all sorts of everyday ways. So first, the analytical answer to the question of why it's appropriate to talk about gender as the world burns. This is the analysis that I actually present in my book, Out of the Fog, published by Spinifex Press. In this day and age, we're facing many urgent problems, from climate change to war, police brutality, gun violence, the rape epidemic exposed again by the Me Too movement. And these problems share a common denominator, men's violence. Of course, this is feminist analysis rather than simply the analysis I'm presenting in my book. Yeah, other people have spoken about this previously, Exhibit A. So this violence is inextricable from the gender norm that is masculinity, and from the widespread pornography that teaches the fetishization of domination and violation. So my book draws on the work of both Kathleen Barry and Barry Sanders. Kathleen Barry talks about how masculinity is crucial to enabling men to numb themselves sufficiently to kill in war without any personal motivation or grievance. Barry Sanders' book on the environmental impact of war points out that the United States military's contribution to global fossil fuel emissions is such that, quote, even if every person, every automobile, and every factory suddenly emitted zero emissions, the Earth would still be headed first and at full speed toward total disaster for one major reason. The military, that voracious vampire, produces enough greenhouse gases by itself to place the entire globe, with all its inhabitants, large and small, in the most imminent danger of extinction, end quote. So if it is masculinity that enables men to participate in this destruction, then clearly gender is not a matter of mere identity politics, and important to discuss not just as the world burns, but because it burns. So there is another answer to the question, though, of why discuss gender while the world burns, that I want to offer by way of those biographies of Thich Nhat Hanh and Etty Hillesum. A warning that my talk is going to sound more chaste and pious than I mean it to be, but by the end I hope the message about gender is clear. Buddhist teacher and activist Thich Nhat Hanh is known for his opposition to the Vietnam War, lifelong commitment to nonviolence, and for coining the term socially engaged Buddhism. In his lesser known book, Cultivating the Mind of Love, Nhat Hanh shares an experience he had when he was 24 and giving a course on basic Buddhism at a temple in the highlands of Vietnam. It would have been 1950 or 1951. More than anything else, he wrote, I wanted to renew Buddhism in my country to make it relevant to the needs of the young people. While at the temple, Nhat Hanh fell in love. He writes, monks do not usually share stories like this, but I think it's important to do so. Nhat Hanh uses the story as a teaching. He met a young nun he says was as peaceful as the Buddha sitting on the grass. The moment I saw her, I recognized in her everything I cherished. Initially, Nhat Hanh could not fathom the disturbance inside him after meeting this woman. He couldn't concentrate and hardly slept. The two shared dinner, and Nhat Hanh read her some of his poetry. He wrote, inside I understood. I knew that I loved her. I only wanted to be with her, to sit near her and contemplate her. As they continued to meet and talk, they found they shared the same ideals, and Nhat Hanh began helping the young nun, who was 20, with studies and translation work. Nhat Hanh writes that he never even had the idea to hold her hands in mine or to kiss her on the forehead. He wrote, for our lives to continue, I could not be less than a monk, nor she less than a nun. It was impossible for me to open my door, walk to her room, and knock at her door. That would have destroyed everything. Finally, another nun finds out about the feelings that the two Buddhists share and tells the woman to leave Nhat Hanh's company for Hanoi. She obliges, not out of obedience, but for the sake of those shared ideals. Nhat Hanh was overwhelmed by sadness, in his words, and remembers the moment they parted. He wrote, she stood up, came close to me, took my head in her arms, and drew me close to her in a very natural way. I allowed myself to be embraced. That was the first and last time we had any physical contact. Then we bowed and separated. Who knows what this connection sparked inside Nhat Hanh and how it sustained him in the years to follow as he developed the practice of socially engaged Buddhism and lived in exile. In those initial months when the pain of separation eased, he wrote, we were able to grow, to see things differently, and our love became more mature. The element of attachment lessened, allowing compassion and loving kindness to flower. Separation did not destroy our love, it strengthened it. Over time, my love for her did not diminish, but it was no longer confined to one person. I was supporting hundreds of monks and nuns, and since that time we've become thousands, yet that love is still there, stronger and larger. The word love is often understood to be a virtue, a strong preference for one person over another, or a mysterious state that some mystics are blessed to achieve. But Nhat Hanh's story reveals love as a life energy that can be sparked and liberated. For Nhat Hanh, the refusal to engage in a relationship that would be either transactional or possessive, the refusal of gender, in other words, was key to enabling him to liberate this force and meet the challenges of his time. Etty Hillesum was a Dutch Jewish diarist whose journals are published in a book called An Interrupted Life, The Diaries and Letters of Etty Hillesum, 1941 to 43. Etty's diaries begin when she was just 27 and living under Nazi occupation in Amsterdam. The last entry occurs a year before she was murdered at Auschwitz, while she was going between, just before actually, she was going between Amsterdam and a labor camp in the Dutch East called Westerbork. We first read about the conditions in Amsterdam. Yellow stars and ghettos. Can I have my drink bottle? Some days the sound of, quote, planes, ack fire, shooting and bombs. Jews forbidden to buy in stores frequented by non-Jews. Etty suffers sore and blistered feet because of having to walk all over the city, since Jews are not allowed on the trams and only on designated streets. In June 1941, she records, more arrests, more terror, concentration camps, the arbitrary dragging off of fathers, sisters, brothers. We seek the meaning of life, wondering whether any meaning can be left, but that is something each of us must settle with himself and with God. By February 1942, Etty had to visit the Gestapo hall, where an officer was shouting at Jews to take their hands out of their pockets and other paranoid things, she says. And Etty merely found him pitiable. Noticing the expression on her face, the officer yelled at her to get the hell out of here. She wrote, I'm not easily frightened. Not because I'm brave, but because I know I'm dealing with human beings and that I must try as hard as I can to understand everything that anyone ever does. And that was the real import of this morning. Not that a disgruntled young Gestapo officer yelled at me, but that I felt no indignation, rather a real compassion, and would have liked to ask, did you have a very unhappy childhood? Has your girlfriend let you down? Yes, he looked harassed and driven, sullen and weak. I should have liked to start treating him there and then, for I know that pitiful young men like that are dangerous as soon as they let loose on mankind. But all the blame must be put on a system that uses such people. What needs eradicating is the evil in man, not man himself. Etty often asks herself, and is asked by others, if her introspective inclination is not escapist at a time of genocide. But her diaries record stark confrontation with the prospect of annihilation, as much as they do discoveries about herself, God, and her inner resources. She writes, there are few illusions left to us. Life is going to be very hard. We shall be torn apart, all who are dear to one another. I don't think the time is very far off now. A few pages on, quote, I see no other solution. I really see no other solution than to turn inward and to root out all the rottenness there. I no longer believe that we can change anything in the world until we have first changed ourselves. And that seems to me to be the only lesson to be learnt from this war, that we must look into ourselves and nowhere else. Etty's inner transformation, like Nhat Hanh's, is catalyzed by her relationship with Julius Speer, a Jungian analyst and palm reader Etty meets at the outset of her diary. The first entry is dated March 1941. Speer becomes Etty's therapist and then her friend and lover. In fact, Etty's journal entries are possibly more preoccupied with her inner life, her love of Rilke, and her relationship with God and with Speer than the intensification of Nazi persecution around her. A feminist reader might find it difficult to feel kindly towards Speer, not only because of his breach of professional boundaries as a therapist and his rather tactile treatment methods, but because of the 3-decade age gap between the two. But by the end of the text, it would take a hardened heart indeed to deny the extraordinary bond of love and respect between the two. In early April 1942, Etty writes, "With every new phase of our relationship, I look back and say to myself, the bond between us has never been as deep and strong as it is now. With every fresh step, the relationship seems to gain in intensity, and all that went before seems to pale in comparison. So much more many-sided and colorful and eloquent and inward does our relationship become all the time." Etty is determined not to succumb to feelings that she, quote, wanted to own him, wanted him to be part of me. Early in her journal, she reflects on her conditioning to feminine dependency. She writes how, "All my life I had the feeling that, for all my apparent self-reliance, if someone came along, took me by the hand, and bothered about me, I would be only too willing and eager to deliver myself up to his care." She admits, "My immediate reaction when meeting a man is invariably to gauge his sexual possibilities. I recognize this as a bad habit that must be stamped out." As Etty commits to this process, which takes the form of constant, gentle self-observation and inquiry, she slowly discovers that by resisting the temptation to attach her love desperately to one man, one paltry man, an energy begins to swell inside her to enhance what she calls her human warmth and to become the very force that enables her to meet her destiny, in her words. She observes, "Something in me is growing, and every time I look inside, something fresh has appeared, and all I have to do is accept it, to take it upon myself, to bear it forward, and to let it flourish." Etty gradually discovers within herself, quote, "an exaltation that all kinds of human beings should feel free to open themselves to me, that no human being is alien to me any longer, that I can find the way to people of every sort, joyful love for all the many kinds of people, and happiness because I shall always be able to find my way to each one of them." At a time today, as the world burns, and we're so good at preaching love and kindness left, right, and center, while we are saturated with sex, from the mass consumption and glorification of porn and prostitution, to making pride flags for every conceivable and inconceivable sexual orientation, to dating on Tinder as though it's a form of online shopping, to the usual Hollywood preoccupation with romance. Etty shows us that love is not just an entitlement or nice feeling or attitude, certainly not something pornified, but a force that we can work to free. She writes, "We could fight war and all its excrescences by releasing each day the love that is shackled inside us and giving it a chance to live." Etty and Spear's inner lives complement in a way that facilitates Etty's growth and affirms her commitment to her inner life. By April 1942, Etty describes many moments where she is certain that no matter where I was in the world, I would always find stars and be able to flop down on a bed or on a floor or anywhere else and feel absolutely at home. While she suspects that her privilege, in scare quotes, relative to other Jews, may make it easier for her to entertain such ideas, she writes with starkness and conviction, "I am not really frightened of anything. I feel so strong. It matters little whether you have to sleep on a hard floor or whether you are only allowed to walk through certain specified streets and so on. These are all minor vexations, so insignificant compared with the infinite riches and possibilities we carry within us. We must guard these and remain true to them and keep faith with them." Etty's seriousness, clarity, and courage are increasingly apparent, and she understands the risk of using God as an escape. In 1942, in July, she writes, "We try to save so much in life with a vague sort of mysticism. Mysticism must rest on crystal clear honesty, can only come after things have been stripped down to their naked reality." That same month, to her own dismay, out of need for income, Etty accepts a job at the Jewish Council, which Ava Hoffman explains in the book's preface. Was formed at the instigation of the Germans to mediate between the Nazis and the massive Jews. The Nazis gave orders to the council, this is a quote, and then let it decide how to implement them. The council was under the illusion that by negotiation, it could save the Jews from the worst. Etty finds it dismal to work there. My letter of application to the Jewish Council on Jaap's urgent advice has upset my cheerful yet deadly serious equilibrium. As if I had done something underhand, like crowding onto a small piece of wood adrift on an endless ocean after a shipwreck, and then saving oneself by pushing others into the water and watching them drown. It is all so ugly, and I don't think much of this particular crowd either. I would much rather join those who prefer to float on their backs for a while, drifting on the ocean with their eyes turned toward heaven, and who then go down with a prayer. As she begins work, a street roundup of Jews takes place in Amsterdam. The Jews were taken to Westerbork, close to Germany in the Dutch East. Westerbork was a transit camp, a transit between life in Holland and Auschwitz. Amazingly, Etty notes that the call-up notice for deportation informed recipients that the journey is free, oh yes, free, and they're not allowed to take any pets with them. Etty's understanding of her destiny grows more radical. In one passage, she reflects, "If we have to share a prison cell with several others, isn't it our duty to keep our bodies and souls clean and fresh?" As she begins to understand that God is not accountable to us for the senseless harm we cause one another, we are accountable to him. It is dawning on her that she wants to go to Westerbork voluntarily. Despite her friends telling her this means that she has given up, she begins preparing. Quote, "Have I really made so much progress that I can say with complete honesty, I hope they will send me to a labor camp so that I can do something for the 16-year-old girls who will also be going. When I tell others fleeing or hiding is pointless, there is no escape, so let's just do what we can for others. It sounds too much like defeatism, like something I don't mean at all. I cannot find the right words either for that radiant feeling inside me, which encompasses but is untouched by all the suffering and all the violence." Etty goes. For a time, special permits from the Jewish Council allow her to travel between the camp and Amsterdam. She brings letters and messages and medicines and is sometimes prevented from returning to Westerbork because of illness, but her commitment is palpable. Her friends actually tried to kidnap her to stop her from continuing to go back to Westerbork. She writes, "I so wish I could put it all into words. Those 2 months behind barbed wire have been the 2 richest and most intense months of my life, in which my highest values were so deeply confirmed. I have learned to love Westerbork." Her grappling with God seems to resolve itself. It's fine, I can't talk about Etty Hillesum without crying. As she commits to becoming the thinking heart of the barracks and doing all she could to safeguard God within herself. "They may succeed in breaking me physically," she wrote, but no more than that. She comforts the Jews at Westerbork, eases their suffering, and volunteers in the hospital. She wrote, I shall try to help you, God, to stop my strength ebbing away, though I cannot vouch for it in advance. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear to me, that you cannot help us, that we must help you to help ourselves. And that is all we can manage these days, and also all that really matters, that we safeguard that little piece of you, God, in ourselves, and perhaps in others as well. Alas, there doesn't seem to be much you yourself can do about our circumstances, about our lives. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the last. There are, it is true, some who, even at this late stage, are putting their vacuum cleaners and silver spoons and forks in safekeeping instead of guarding you, dear God. The last words in Etty's diary read, we should be willing to act as a balm for all wounds. Inevitably, her ability to gain passes to travel back to Amsterdam came to a halt, and she was under no illusions about this. In September 1943, she was sent to Auschwitz, and to reassure her friends, she wrote a postcard from the train and threw it out the window. The postcard was discovered by a farmer and delivered to the address. It read, I'm sitting on my rucksack in the middle of a full freight car. Father, mother, and Misha are a few cars away. In the end, the departure came without warning, on sudden special order from The Hague. We left the camp singing. Hillesum's diaries are echoed in a short passage from the Indian sacred text, the Upanishads. Those who use their days for sexual pleasure consume prana, the very stuff of life, but mastered, sex becomes a spiritual force. Hillesum wrote that what energies I possess have been set free inside of me. Echoing Nhat Hanh, she also wrote, and once the love of humankind has germinated within you, it will grow without measure. This story may seem painfully chaste to many, perhaps Nhat Hanh's, in a culture where sexual conquest is required proof of masculine prowess, while, as Janice Raymond writes, women are assimilated by the hetero-relational ideology that men are a woman's greatest adventure. But Etty asks, so many couples rush off to be married at the last moment in haste and desperation. I would rather be alone and there for everyone. So, as I stated in the beginning, the point of relaying these experiences, Etty's and Nhat Hanh's, is not to advocate for chastity or any particular strategy in relationships or in responding to war, oppression, or any other collective emergency. The point is that these two people teach us how love as a force can be liberated to help us meet the challenges of our time in a way that we see fit and with the energy required. Etty asks, why not turn the love that cannot be bestowed on another or on the other sex into a force that benefits the whole community and that might still be love? I still don't know what all of this means for me personally, but because of Etty in particular, I ask myself the question every day.